Every leader knows that a thriving organization depends on the energy, productivity, and commitment of its people. But few leaders are able to cultivate the employee engagement and performance needed for this level of success. What's the difference? Positive leadership practices. Welcome to the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast with your host, positive work culture expert, Alex Bratty. Ready to harness the power of positive leadership? Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Positive Leadership Movement. I'm your host, Alex Bratty, and in this episode, you're going to discover what exactly is a positive leader? What are the practices that a positive leader engages in to create a positive organization that is flourishing and producing extraordinary results? And how can you be a positive leader who gets those top results and works with your teams to foster more productivity and performance? Woo, that is a lot to cover, and it's all super juicy content. So let's dive right in and start with the burning question of what exactly is a positive leader? And I'll begin by answering that with what a positive leader is not, okay? A positive leader is not someone who is all smiles all the time, contrary to conventional wisdom when I discuss this topic. And it's not someone who is so optimistic and hopeful that he or she is blind to reality. However, a positive leader does focus on achieving excellence, and a positive leader does exercise a bias towards what is good. So let's talk about both of these in a little more detail. So first, this notion of achieving excellence. Maybe you're thinking, hey, that's kind of the domain of all leaders, Alex, but actually not, because think about it for a moment. Excellence differently. Well, leading researchers in this field in positive leadership, Jane Dutton and Gretchen Spreitzer from the University of Michigan, they have found that it's actually very simple. And in fact, if you want to read more on this, check out their book, How to Be a Positive Leader. It is a terrific, fast read. Anyhow, they have found in their research that positive leaders believe in expanding the capability and degree of excellence in their organization. And they make this happen by implementing a series of small actions that have a very profound impact over time. Now, let's pause just for a moment there, because this is an incredibly important point that I want you all to hear loud and clear. Positive leaders are not born. Being a positive leader is not genetic. It's not a case of you have it or you don't have it. No. On the contrary, being a positive leader is learned, and it's an option available to all of us. Why? Because being a positive leader means, like we just said, engaging in a series of small actions, all of which are simple and easy to implement. Now, there's no secret ingredient here, right? It's just a simple choice to behave and act in a certain way. So, if you want to be a positive leader or become a better positive leader, the very first thing you need to do is make the decision that you are going to do things differently, that you are going to engage in some small actions that have been proven over and over in multiple industries and organizations that to give a myriad of amazing results and desirable outcomes, such as increases in employee productivity and engagement, more creativity and resilience, and, of course, the bottom line, an elevated financial performance. Now, you might be thinking, okay, I'm committed. Now, what are the small actions I need to take to make this happen, right? Great question. And I love that you're thinking that. We're going to discuss that shortly. But just before we do, I want to address the second element of being a positive leader, and that is exercising a bias towards what is good. And what exactly does that mean? And this is a really important point, because I think this is where people get tripped up in thinking that positive leaders are just smiles, rainbows, and unicorns all the time, when of course that is not our reality in organizations, where more often than not we're dealing with putting out fires and challenges and problems that are coming up, right? So this notion of exercising a bias towards the good, we have to really define that so that it's clear what we're talking about here, that it isn't all rainbows and roses, okay? So what it means is looking for what is going well in the organization. It means using a strengths-based approach to employee development. Because you see, as humans, we are automatically programmed to pay more attention to the negative. It's an evolutionary thing. And of course, we're going to pay more attention to the possibility of a lion coming to eat us than the fact that it's a beautiful day to go hunting, right? Granted, the threats of our ancestors who dealt with those kind of challenges on a daily basis are very different from those that we face today. But our brains still function in exactly the same way. They default to noticing the negative rather than the positive. Not only that, but the negative, the power of the negative is greater than the power of the positive, right? So not only are we naturally scanning our environment for negative, but when negative happens, it is more noticeable and it sticks with us more than positive, right? And so that's our default as humans. And that is also, right, what keeps us stuck in a space of normal or subpar performance, because it means in an organizational context, if employee evaluations are given where managers basically gloss over what the employee is doing well and focus most of the time on all the areas of quote unquote improvement, translation, weakness, then what are we doing? We're focusing more on the negative, right? And I'm not saying that improving weaknesses or paying attention to the negative is bad. It's not. And of course, we need a healthy dose of this. But a positive leader is choosing to spend more time focusing on strengths and how to amplify what is going well. So essentially, a positive leader is retraining his or her brain to spot what is good and to build on that. Now, if you're feeling a little skeptical about this, let's just really digest. Let's pause for a moment and really digest what this means, okay? So think of an Olympic athlete whose specialty is the 100-meter sprint. Do you think that athlete's coach and manager are telling that athlete that her weakness is in long distance, so she needs to spend valuable training time shoring up that weakness and becoming more competent in running, the 800 meters or even a marathon? Of course not, right? If that was happening, that coach and manager would be fired in a heartbeat, right? That manager, that coach, and that athlete are focusing their time on how performance at 100 meters can be optimized because that's the strengths. They're playing to the athlete's strengths. Now, within that area, let's say this athlete always gets the jitters on the starting blocks and never comes off them fast enough. So she's always under pressure immediately to make up distance and try to pull ahead to win, which is pretty hard to do in a 100-meter sprint, right? So the starting blocks are a weakness in this athlete's area of strength. Of course, she needs to work at that. She's going to spend hours of intensive training just practicing coming off the blocks. Her coach is going to simulate the anxiety of a real race and make her practice and practice and practice. At the same time, though, they're also going to spend time building on where she is really powerful, making up that lost time and pulling ahead, right? Literally, she's able to find a whole other gear with which to accelerate. So what's happening here? The whole team is focused on the athlete's strength, the 100-meter sprint, and developing it. But they're not ignoring a weakness in this area. They're going to spend time improving her coming off those blocks. And they're going to amplify her strength of acceleration at explosive speeds. This is what positive leadership is all about. It's about looking for the strengths in individuals, teams, and the organization as a whole and playing to those. It doesn't mean ignoring weaknesses, just like the starting blocks for the athlete. Those absolutely need to be addressed, but it does mean highlighting and building on what's going well. So just like that elite athlete focuses on what she's good at, the 100-meter sprint, so should a positive leader focus on what his or her organization, team, and the individuals working for them are good at. And of course, for yourself as a leader. So, as a positive leader, if you know where you're strong, you can compensate your weaknesses by surrounding yourself with people who have the strengths in the areas where you are lacking. And that is how effective teams are created throughout the organization. But we can't do any of that if we don't know what our strengths are and those of the people in the organization. So here again, I just want to point out that being a positive leader is not about inheriting some amazingly charismatic personality and God-given talent. Sure, some people have this. Let me know who they are, because most of us mere mortals, being a positive leader is about making the choice to approach these things differently, to look for the good and build on the strengths, and to develop our positive leadership practices and skills. All right. So if you're still with me, and of course I hope you are, I'm guessing that you're willing to make these choices. First, to engage in some simple and small actions that will have a powerful impact over time. And second, to retrain your brain to focus on the good. All right, I love the commitment. So now let's answer the question from earlier. What exactly are these small actions that you can take as a positive leader to create a positive organization that is flourishing and producing extraordinary results? Well, one of the first things a positive leader seeks to do is create a positive organizational climate. And Kim Cameron, another premier positive leadership researcher, has found that there are three crucial elements to this. The first is practicing gratitude. The second is compassion. And the third is forgiveness. And again, if you want to find out more about this, you can check out his book, Positive Leadership. It's a terrific read. So we talked in detail in episode 2 about practicing gratitude and the various different ways you can do this, such as writing thank you cards to employees and having employees keep a daily gratitude journal. So if you haven't already listened to that episode, check it out because it does go into more detail on this. But just as a quick recap and overview as we get into these 3 small actions, right? And as we'll cover the first one, gratitude. So essentially a gratitude practice has 2 important effects. First, it trains your brain to look for the positive, what's going well, what opportunities exist that I may be able to build on, which of course we were just talking about as a core element of positive leadership, okay? And second, the second effect that gratitude had is that the people in your organization start to feel more appreciated and valued. And, what do you think that does for their performance? Yeah, it has a positive impact, right? Like if you feel valued, appreciated, and that you're contributing something meaningful, you're going to put in more effort. You're going to have better performance. So that's true for you as a leader. It's true for the people who work for you as well, right? So the first suggestion for one small action you could take that'll have a profound effect over time is to do a gratitude practice. So for example, write 5 thank you cards to people in your organization every day. Just have a stack of cards on your desk and commit to handwriting them each day. Probably takes you 10 or 15 minutes of your time. But I can assure you, as it's been shown over and over in the research, not only will it make you feel good, but the ripple effect in the organization will be stunning, okay? One CEO who committed to this many years ago says the company culture has transformed as a result of this simple act. And guess what? He's still doing it every single day, years and years later, because he says it forces him to spend time, at least some time, every day focusing on what's going well every day, right? And we've talked about this over and over, right? We have to retrain our brains. How do we do that? By focusing on what's going well. And so not only does this act engage in specifically gratitude and expressing gratitude to the people who work for you, making them feel appreciated and valued, and guess what? Improving their performance. But it also is helping you to scan the environment for what is going well, what is going good each day. Because if you need to sit down and write a thank you card, you're going to think about, okay, who am I going to write this to today? Who's doing a really great job? What did they do? Your brain is now scanning for what's positive, okay? Now, maybe you don't have an organization big enough to be writing 5 thank you cards every day. So write 1, write 2, whatever it is, modify it to fit you and your organization and where they're at, okay? Now, the other thing you could do is you could have you and all your employees keep a daily gratitude journal, right? And implement practices where people openly thank their teammates in front of others, right? So there are many different ways to do this in terms of bringing gratitude as a practice into the organization. And all of them are so small and simple, yet the impact is profound. Okay, so gratitude, and you're going to hear about this over and over because the effect of practicing gratitude is incredibly powerful in all domains of our life. So it helps people who practice gratitude are more likely to be physically, mentally, emotionally healthier. As we've talked about in the organizational context, bringing a practice of gratitude into the organization increases productivity, job satisfaction, engagement, and of course, performance. So there's a lot to gain by implementing a gratitude practice. All right, so that's the first type of small action that you could take. How about the second? How about practicing compassion? Now, this is one that we know often gets lost in the shuffle of trying to increase the bottom line. But engaging in compassion can transform your organization from somewhere that people work to get a paycheck to a place where employees want to come to work, they're committed to the cause of the organization, they're loyal to the brand, and they shout it from the rooftops. What would you rather have? What kind of workforce would you rather have? They show up for the paycheck, do their job, and go home? Or they're all in, and they're all in for you, they're all in for the company, they're doing their very best, they want to be there. I don't know about you, but I think that's a pretty simple question to answer, right? We all want the committed employees. So what does this look like? Well, a classic example is Southwest Airlines, right? So in the wake of the September 11 attacks, all the airlines, as you probably recall, were hit very hard. Okay, people weren't traveling. Flights were grounded, right? I mean, life was just on hold at that time. And the airlines were losing millions of dollars a day. And virtually every one of them went through layoffs and furloughs. But not Southwest. They refused to lay off a single employee. And here's what then CEO Jim Parker said about it when the airline was losing $5 million a day. $5 million a day for weeks after the attacks. Okay, and this is a quote. Clearly we can't continue to do this indefinitely, but we're willing to suffer some damage even to our stock price to protect the jobs of our people. Nobody has ever been furloughed at Southwest, and it's been a huge strength of ours. You want to show your people that you value them and you're not going to hurt them just to get a little more money in the short term. Not furloughing people breeds loyalty. It breeds a sense of security. It breeds a sense of trust. Wow. Talk about doing what's right and exercising compassion for your employees, right? At a time when they need it the most, right? Like that was a very unusual circumstance. It was a crisis circumstance. And now you might actually say, well, that's a really huge action that he took, right? They're losing $5 million a day for weeks, and he chooses not to lay off a single employee. Yeah, that is a huge action. You're right. That is an exceptional circumstance. But in a more day-to-day basis, there are small ways in which you can cultivate compassion in your organization beyond even the leadership level. And it involves 3 steps, okay? And this is work by Jane Dutton. We've mentioned her before out of the University of Michigan. She's one of the top researchers in this area. So it involves 3 steps: collective noticing, collective feeling, and collective responding. So when people first experience these trying events, right, that something has happened, something has gone wrong, it just means that people are on the lookout for this. So let me give you an example, okay? So Cisco used a system whereby the CEO had to be notified within 48 hours if an employee or employee's close family was seriously ill or passed away. Okay, so this is a trying time. This is a time when compassion is needed. And so what it meant was, by having this system in place, the employees in the organization were vigilant in looking out for one another, right? The collective noticing. And it also sent a message that the organization valued their employees and families, right? I mean, that is a true example of collective noticing. But how about the next step of collective feeling? What is that all about? Well, this can be done, and again, I'm just giving you sort of day-to-day examples here rather than the exceptional circumstances, but for example, starting team meetings by asking members to share how they're feeling about their workload and tasks instead of just offering a status update, right? And we all have these meetings. We know how they can go, right? It can just literally be like a robotic around the table. Where are you at on this project? Where are we at on that one? And everybody's just offering a status update, but there's no context to it, right? And so if you can extend this to have people weigh in on, how are you feeling about that project? How are you feeling about that timeline? And I'm not saying this becomes some kumbaya circle, but it certainly increases communication and it lets everybody know where the team is at, right? Where individuals in the team are at. It gives an opportunity for people to pitch in if needed, to exercise compassion if someone, we're all humans in an organization. We bring our lives with us to work, right? So if you've got a spouse at home who's sick or a child who's sick, guess what? You may not be 100% on top of your work that particular day. And if you're able to express that in a meeting in a safe space, then help can be found in the team, right? To shore each other up. That is compassion and that's collective feeling, right? And this can also extend to non-workload, okay? Now, I'm not suggesting that the meeting becomes some kind of coffee klatch, okay? Nobody's interested in that. But it can, if done like this, if feelings are allowed to be shared by work, it can be a helpful forum for allowing team members to feel better connected and to be seen and heard and valued, right? All of which contributes to better performance and more engagement, right? Okay, so that's collective noticing, collective feeling. How about collective responding, right? Which is really the third step in exercising compassion, having practices of compassion in the workplace. Well, like everything, there's different ways to do this. So some organizations set up specific processes for this. For example, there's a hospital system that publicly rewards employees for acts of compassion, right? It issues a newsletter every month that features demonstrations of compassion by employees and, which I think is so cool, it allows its employees to donate paid time off and personal days to other employees who may need extended time off in unusual circumstances, right? So let's say there's an employee where and I went through this myself. My spouse had cancer. He survived. We're incredibly blessed. But it requires extensive time out of the office, right? I had to take him to multiple treatments. We had unexpected hospital stays. There are all kinds of twists and turns in that journey. And this was over a period of 10 months. And at the time, I was a partner in a firm. So I had the capability to schedule and change my workload and control that. But if you have people working for you who don't have as much freedom to dictate their own schedule, to manage their own time, they may have to schedule days off to deal with a circumstance such as this. And it may require that they're eating into vacation time, they're using up all their personal days, and they're left looking at nothing, right? So in a situation like this, how amazing is it if others in the organization can actually donate their vacation time, their personal days, and help that person, right? That is collective responding right there. Okay, so compassion in organizations is this combination of collective noticing, collective feeling, and collective responding, right? And incorporating this doesn't have to be difficult or complicated, but of course, it will involve choosing the systems or techniques that are a good fit for your organization, right? So like everything that I'm sharing on this podcast, these are proven methods for how you can implement, but they've got to feel right for you. And I'm not suggesting that you go out and do them all at once, which we'll talk about in a minute, but let's get to the third part of this, right? So before I even go to the third part, which is forgiveness, just on this topic of compassion, right? Because sometimes I bring this up and people look at me like I have two heads, like compassion in the workplace. Isn't that kind of an oxymoron? I mean, that's weird. Like it's not a really compassionate place, the workplace, right? Well, so if you are wondering about this and you're wondering why you would even bother to do this, right? To cultivate compassion in your workplace, and if you're thinking it might be too gooey or soft, well, I already gave you Southwest philosophy, but here are some hard facts and numbers if that's not enough to convince you, right? So, fact, as I mentioned earlier, employees are people, okay? Fact, that means they're human and deal with all kinds of hardships and grief. Whether it be the loss of loved ones, the loss of homes, sick children at home, whatever, right? There's so many reasons that your employees might be feeling loss or grief. And fact, they bring that grief with them to work. As much as they might valiantly try to leave it in the parking lot or, leave it at home, we're human. We carry this stuff with us, right? And fact, and here's your hard number, it costs organizations more than $75 billion annually to deal with the grief that employees bring with them to work. $75 billion annually. So, with that level of cost, which is hardly insignificant, maybe, just maybe, it's worth injecting some compassion into your workplace so you can mitigate these costs, help your employees to move through their hardship with support, and make them feel safe and valued so that in turn, as we've discussed, they will demonstrate the loyalty and commitment that Southwest CEO Jim Parker described. All right. Okay, so the one last simple action that we'll talk about today that you can do to shore up your positive leadership is exercising forgiveness. Now, here again, you might be wondering about the value of this, seemingly soft approach, if you like, in the world of the hard world of organizations. Well, the research shows that exercising forgiveness actually has extraordinary results in the face of very difficult circumstances, such as downsizing, right? In fact, forgiveness is one of the positive leadership practices that facilitated the transformation of a large hospital facing millions of dollars of losses and a downsizing initiative into an organization that is not only back in the black, but posting multi-million-dollar profits, ranking in Forbes 100 best places to work, and in the top 5% of distinguished hospitals for clinical excellence. Wow, that's quite a turnaround, right? And that whole case study, forgiveness is one of the key attributes that they talk about as helping make that transformation happen. So what does forgiveness in organizations look like? I mean, we know what it looks like on a personal basis, right? We've all chosen to forgive or not people in our lives. We know what that looks like, but what does it look like in organizations? Well, based on multiple studies gathered by, again, our friend Kim Cameron, he's a leading researcher in this field, there are really 5 elements to this, right? So the first thing we got to do, very basic, we got to acknowledge what happened, okay? We got to acknowledge the event and the trauma that was caused by it, okay? So we're going to acknowledge it and then define it as an opportunity for moving forward towards a better future, okay? So in an organizational context, let's suppose that, John, who works for you, screwed up some report, and as a result, you lost a client, okay? That's a pretty big screw up, right? And there's trauma there, okay? For everybody, okay? John probably feels terrible. You're pissed. If you've got a boss, they're pissed too because we lost the client. What does it mean for our reputation? Obviously, we lost the money coming in. That's a screw up. But you know what? That stuff happens. That's what being a business is about, right? This is what happens in organizations. So what are we going to do? Are we going to hold the grudge against John and decide that from now on he can't work on any reports, that he just is a screw up? No. Why would we do that? Okay. John's a valuable employee. He screwed up on this particular item. Okay. What we're going to do is forgive. And so first of all, we have to acknowledge what happened. Okay. The report was not done well. We lost the client. That is a problem, okay? But then we're going to define that as an opportunity for moving forwards, i.e., okay, it happened. Now, how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? How do we make sure that moving forward, the reports are done well, we keep our clients, and we're not dealing with this situation again, right? It's an opportunity. It's a learning moment, if you like, right? And that's how we're going to treat it. So that's the first step. Acknowledge it, define it as an opportunity for moving forward, okay? Second is to identify a purpose for employees by associating the products or services of an organization with their personal values, right? And this kind of helps replace any feelings of victimization with feelings of purpose and fulfillment, right? So in this example, if we continue with this example, so John didn't do a good job on the report. We've lost the client. We lost the revenue. Okay. Now, if we just make it about the revenue coming into the business, I mean, John feels bad, but how bad might he really feel? Probably not that bad because he knows the organization's doing well. He's still going to get a paycheck, right? It's like, we'll go get another client. Okay. In the scheme of things, he may not think it's that big a deal, right? However, if we can identify a purpose, right, so that it brings John back into the fold here in terms of, rather than him feeling like, oh my God, I'm sort of being the sacrificial lamb here. I'm being victimized because of this. I did something wrong, but, we're all human, okay? If we can create some kind of purpose in terms of reminding him, hey, our organization is here to help people do XYZ, okay? Whatever it is that your company does, whatever their product helps them do in their life, whatever service helps them move forward in their life, whatever that end purpose is, right? The sort of the meaningful element, we've got to reconnect that so that John gets not only re-engaged, but also doesn't feel completely victimized, like he is just, the worst person in the world here, right? So the second part is we've got to identify a purpose for the employee, okay? Third, and this is really important because I know some of you are going to be like, oh, what are we dealing with snowflakes here? We have to just make them feel good even though they screwed up with something. I hear you loud and clear. And to that, here comes the third step. We're going to set and keep high standards. And we're going to communicate that forgiveness does not mean that low levels of performance or mistakes are acceptable. Okay? So no, we're not letting John off the hook. We're not letting our standards slide. We're not saying, okay, everybody just gets a pass here. Not at all. We have high standards. We're going to forgive. Forgiveness is going to happen here, but it doesn't mean that it's okay moving forward, right? So when we do this in the third piece, right, it allows the individuals involved and the organization to move on and not dwell on the negative, right? So again, instead of dwelling on John screwed up, he made a mistake, it's like, hey, it didn't meet our high standards. Okay, it's not okay that this happened. We're going to move on. We're going to use it as a learning moment, but it's not going to be acceptable in the future, right? So lest you be worried in the second step that we're just letting people off the hook and trying to make them feel good. In the third step, we are being pretty firm and we are saying we've got these high standards. Mistakes aren't acceptable. We're going to move forward, okay? Knowing that. Everybody knows that. Everybody gets it, that we're going to meet these high standards. Okay, and then fourth is providing social support for, both perpetrators and victims, right? So that they are both humanized instead of villainized or alienated. Now, this is, in the example that we have, okay, it may not be as salient to that example that I've been using, but this one would be more in the case of, like, let's say there was an interpersonal conflict or somebody felt like they had been wronged by somebody else in the workplace. This would be a good opportunity to engage in this fourth step, right? To provide the social support for both sides so that they both feel humanized. Because even, when we talk, obviously it's obvious in a situation like that where the person who's been wronged, the victim, we expect there to be social support there, right? and that's fine and all the rest of it. But the perpetrator also needs support in some fashion too, so that they are not alienated and forever seen as this person, this monster. Okay. So there has to be support there. Now, I'm not saying that everybody, again, this isn't a snowflake exercise, right? We're not going to wrap that person in cotton wool and say, there, it's okay. You wronged somebody, but it's okay. We're all right with that. No, we're not saying that at all. What we are saying here for when I say social support, it may mean that that person gets some coaching, gets some training on how to, change some of their behaviors so that an incident like this doesn't happen again, right? And so that it's all humanized. So I hope that makes sense. Again, I don't want you to think of forgiveness as this sort of, we're just snowflaking everybody and it's all going to be okay. And, we all need to walk around in bubble wrap. No, it's not that at all. We're maintaining high standards and we're acknowledging that something happened that was not good, but we're using it as a learning moment to move forward, make sure we're going to maintain high standards, in the future, and reconnecting everybody to the higher purpose and the meaning of being at the organization, right? And then the fifth and final step is to watch your language, okay? Words have so much power. And so when words such as compassion, humility, love are part of an organization's lexicon, it then becomes natural for statements of forgiveness to be expressed. Okay? So even though our organization life can feel kind of quite geometric, right? Like hard lines and shapes and sort of not a lot of gray area. It's right or it's wrong. We're here to make a boatload of money, whatever. It doesn't have to always be that way, right? We can inject this compassion. We can inject this forgiveness, and we can soften the edges so that people feel safer in their environment. And guess what? In terms of high-performing teams, and I think it was Google did this research, they looked into all kinds of predictors for why teams were high-performing. And the number one was feeling safe, feeling like you were in a safe environment and that you weren't going to be victimized, that you weren't going to be alienated, that you weren't going to be picked on, that you could, you make a mistake, nobody wants that, but it's acknowledged, we learn from it, we move forward, right? And that's the power of forgiveness, is creating that kind of safe space for people to do their job. And yes, they're going to make mistakes. Like, that is just life, but we use it to move forward, okay? Now, here's the thing about this. Most organizations are diminished and performance drops after downsizing, but a review of multiple organizations shows that the 5 elements we just talked about of forgiveness, right? Of acknowledging, identifying a purpose, setting and keeping high standards, providing social support, and using compassionate language. When those are used, those elements of forgiveness have helped organizations to successfully navigate episodes of cutbacks, right? And that is incredibly powerful because it is true. Most organizations that go through downsizing, they're not only are they dealing with that, but they're just dealing with the low morale and everything else that ensues, right? It's kind of a downward spiral when you get to that point of having to downsize. And so you're really left on a back footing when you have to do that. But using these elements of forgiveness has helped multiple organizations to actually get through an unpleasant experience like that and actually do better on the other side of it. So there you have it for this week. We talked about what it takes to become a positive leader, and it's really just 2 things. Number 1, you have to decide to take a series of small actions that will have a long-term positive impact. And number 2, you have to choose to focus most of your attention on the good instead of the bad. Now, we talked about 3 simple actions you could take as a positive leader to start cultivating a positive climate and getting the extraordinary results of a thriving organization. So they were practicing gratitude, compassion, and forgiveness. And like I said earlier, let me be really clear. I am not suggesting that you run out and start doing all 3 of those at once, right? That's going to be overwhelming. We all know that. And then you won't do any of them, okay? So let's be real. Pick one. Pick one of those practices. Pick gratitude, pick compassion, pick forgiveness, whatever it is. Decide the best way to implement it for you and your organization, and then do it. Okay? Make it simple. None of this is hard. It's only us as humans that make these things hard, right? We have to remind ourselves to keep it simple. And so if you do that, if you pick one, you decide the best way to implement it for you, you do it, over time, you're going to notice the positive results. And then you may want to add the other practices, right? Plus, you may also find, like many positive leaders do, that engaging in just one of these practices means that the others happen kind of organically, right? So for example, if you start a gratitude practice in your organization, it's going to lay the groundwork for employees exercising more compassion and forgiveness, right? Because you're setting the stage for it, right? You're creating a world in which it is totally normal for people to express gratitude and to thank them and to appreciate them, right? So that, of course, bleeds into, what we talked about, that 5th step of forgiveness. Creating a world in which the language used is softer. There is more compassion. There is more appreciation. There is more expression of value, right? There's space for forgiveness. These things happen, right? So there's some overlap between these practices, and they can amplify one another, right? Now, what we didn't have time for this week was getting into that second element of positive leadership. Not too much anyway. We talked about it a little bit when we talked about gratitude, but it's that notion of focusing on the good and taking a strengths-based approach. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about that next week. So tune in next week where we'll discuss exactly that. We'll get into why focusing on strengths is so effective and how to identify strengths, okay, because we need to know what they are if we're going to do anything with them. And of course, what to do once you know those strengths, right? So why strengths are so effective, how to identify them, and what to do once you know what your strengths are. So join me next week as we jump into leveraging your strengths and the strengths of those in your organization so that you can reach new levels of excellence and achievement. And if you've got a question about positive leadership, let me know. Just write to questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com. Okay, so send me an email there, questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com, and I will answer it in a future episode. For now, this is Alex Bratty signing off and thanking you for being part of the positive leadership movement.
Make sure you subscribe to the show. If you like this episode, please rate and review. If you want to get more from Alex, check out Happiness at Work, where she provides leaders with a proven path to cultivate a positive work culture that increases performance, productivity, and profitability. Go to happinessatworknow.com. Join us next week and harness the power of positive leadership for your organization.